Hello, good evening, and welcome to Scotland at 7. I'm Hugh Stewart in the Glasgow studio, and today, Friday, the 26th of May, brings us to day 93 of Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. So I'll begin with that now with a roundup of the latest. Okay, so I'll begin with the latest from Ukraine, and then we're going to look at some of the main stories tonight. We don't have a guest, so I'll make this a fairly quick news report. Sorry, did I say 26th? It's Friday the 27th of May. Okay, the latest from the Ukraine war. Kharkiv has been hit by fresh strikes amid fears that the city is still on Russia's agenda. At least 9 civilians were killed, including a child, and 19 injured, authorities said. The Kremlin has rejected claims that Russia has blocked grain exports from Ukraine, blaming the West for creating such a situation by imposing sanctions on Russia. A senior Turkish official said Ankara was in ongoing talks with Russia and Ukraine to open a corridor via the Bosphorus. Pro-Russian militias from the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic have said that they have established full control over the strategic town of Lyman in eastern Ukraine. The claims have not yet been independently verified. Russian ground forces are continuing their attempt to surround Severodonetsk and Lukhansk, having recently captured several villages northwest of Propansa, the UK Minister of Defence has said in its latest report. President Zelensky has said Ukraine was not eager to talk to Russia's Vladimir Putin, but that it has to face the reality that this will be likely necessary to end the war. Russia's Ministry of Defence have claimed to have killed more than 250 fighters overnight and shot down 1 MiG-29 aircraft and destroyed 2 ammunition dumps, one within the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. 2 captured Russian soldiers have pleaded guilty to shelling a town in eastern Ukraine in the second war crimes trial since Russian troops invaded the country. Alexander Bobikin and Alexander Ivanov acknowledged being part of an artillery unit that fired at targets in the Kharkiv region from Russia's Belgorod. There are about 8,000 Ukrainian prisoners of war held in the Russian-backed self-proclaimed Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics, Luhansk official Radion Miroshnik has said. Russia has deployed mobile propaganda vans with large-screen televisions to humanitarian aid points in the captured city of Mariupol. This Orwellian turn comes as the Kremlin continues to push forward with efforts to integrate newly occupied territories across the south of Ukraine. Alexander Lukashenko, the Belarus president, a close ally of Putin, has ordered the creation of a new military command for the south of his country bordering Ukraine. Belarusian armed forces previously said they would deploy special operations troops in 3 areas near its southern border with Ukraine. Lukashenko has also talked up the role of Russian-made missiles in boosting the country's defences. Dmytro Kuleba, Ukraine's foreign minister, said that weapons, weapons and weapons again are what the country needs. We need more heavy weapons delivered as soon as possible, especially multiple launch rocket systems to repel Russian attacks, Mr. Kuleba said. The US is preparing to send advanced long-range rocket systems to Ukraine after an urgent defense from Ukrainian officials. Multiple officials have reportedly told the CNN. Kuleba said that Ukraine's most urgent need is for multiple launch rocket systems, the MLRSs, to counter Russia's superiority in heavy weaponry. President Zelensky also referred to the weapons as the systems that are really needed to stop this aggression in his latest address. More than 100 Russian National Guardsmen have been fired for refusing to fight in Ukraine, court documents show, and what looks like the clearest indication yet of dissent among some parts of security forces over Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. The cases of the 159 National Guardsmen, a force also known as Rosgvardia, came to light on Wednesday after a local Russian court rejected the collective lawsuit that challenged their earlier sacking. According to the court's decision published on its website, the lawsuit was dismissed after the judge determined that the soldiers had been rightfully fired for refusing to perform an official assignment, which was to fight in Ukraine, and instead return to a duty station. The appeal took place in Nalchik, the capital of Kabardino-Balkarian Republic in the Russian Caucasus, where the unit is based since Moscow's invasion of neighbouring Ukraine. Its military has reportedly been plagued by poor morale, with reports of soldiers claiming they did not know they were going to war until they crossed into Ukraine. The Pentagon said this month it had seen anecdotal reports that mid-grade officers at various levels, even up to battalion level, had either refused to obey orders or were not obeying them with the expected measure of alacrity, as the report put it. Andrei Sabinin, the lawyer who represented the 115 soldiers, said the court's decision was unprecedentedly quick, given the complexity of the case. He said, I expressed doubts about the fairness of the process as a whole because my clients were denied to call up certain witnesses and several documents were rejected by the court. According to Sabinin, the commanders of the Rosgvardia unit offered the soldiers the option not to fight, and their dismissal was illegal. Russia created Rosgvardia, a military force separate from the army, in 2016 to fight terrorism and maintain public order. Since its inception, members of Rosgvardia, which is often referred to as Putin's private army, have mostly been involved in crackdowns on peaceful anti-government protests. Military analysts have linked Russia's heavy use of Rosgvardia soldiers in Ukraine to Moscow's strategic aims of capturing and holding major Ukrainian cities, including Kharkiv and the capital Kyiv. These plans failed, of course, while Rosgvardia units suffered heavy casualties after Ukrainian cities remained battlegrounds rather than being captured quickly by Russia, which left Rosgvardia units exposed to Ukrainian attacks. Mikhail Anasiev, the chief editor of Novy Focus, in the Russian region of Caucasia, was arrested by security forces last month over the website's reporting of a separate Rosgvardia unit that also refused deployment to Ukraine. Court testimonies given by members of the Rosgvardia unit, measured in Anasayev's column, confirm early reports that 11 Rosgvardia from Caucasia had refused to fight, despite a recent string of military successes in the Donbass. The Kremlin this week was confronted with 2 incidents of rare public dissent from Russian officials. As we reported on Wednesday, Boris Bondarev, a career diplomat posted to the Russian military mission to the Ukraine in Geneva, became the highest level Russian diplomat to denounce the war, publishing a scathing letter in which he wrote that he was ashamed of his country and called the invasion a disaster. And on Friday, that's today, 2 communist lawmakers from a Kharabovsky Krai in the Far East of Siberia urged Putin to end the Ukraine conflict. To Britain now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is changing the rules to let ministers avoid resigning if they break the ministerial code, allowing instead for them to apologise or temporarily lose their pay. The UK Prime Minister, who's facing himself claims of breaching the ministerial code, published a policy statement on Friday today saying that it's disproportionate to expect that any breach, however minor, should lead automatically to resignation or dismissal. A new version of the ministerial code has been published, suggesting that in future, ministers are likely to face making a public apology, remedial action, or removal of ministerial salary for a period if they retain the confidence of the Prime Minister. One of the reasons for changing the rules is to avoid incentives for trivial or vexatious complaints, which may be made for partisan reasons. It says after a slew of complaints about ministers' conduct from Labour and the Liberal Democrats. The change comes as Johnson faces his own investigation by the Privileges Committee into whether he misled Parliament by claiming that there were no parties in Number 10 during the lockdown period and that the rules were followed at all times. The ministerial code continues to say that it's a resignation matter if a minister knowingly misleads the House of Commons. However, If Johnson is found to have breached other principles of public life, such as lacking openness and honesty, then changes to the rules make it less likely that he would automatically be expected to resign. Under changes to the guidance, Johnson also rejected the idea that his independent advisor should have the power to launch investigations into ministers or the Prime Minister without his permission. The advisor, currently is Christopher Geit, a former aide to the Queen, will in future be able to instigate investigations, but only with the consent of the Prime Minister, who will retain the power to block an inquiry. In such a case, the advisor would have the power to make this situation public. Prime Minister Johnson has also rewritten the foreword to the code, removing all references to honesty, integrity, transparency, and accountability. In his first foreword, published in 2019, he wrote, "There must be no bullying and no harassment, no leaking, no breach of collective responsibility, no misuse of taxpayers' money, and no actual or perceived conflict of interest." The foreword goes on to say the precious principles of public life enshrined in this document, and this is Prime Minister Johnson talking, by the way, these are integrity, objectivity, accountability, transparency, honesty, and leadership in the public interest, must be honoured at all times, as must the political impartiality of our much admired civil servants. Unquote. The 2022 foreword simply lists the government's priorities with only a brief mention of standards and the behaviour of ministers, saying, 30 years after it was first published, the Ministerial Code continues to fulfil its purpose, guiding my ministers, says the Prime Minister, on how they should act and arrange their affairs. As a leader of Her Majesty's Government, my accountability is to Parliament and via the ballot box to the British people. Commenting, the SNP's deputy leader at Westminster, Kirsten Oswald MP, said, "These are the actions of a guilty man, a Prime Minister caught bang to rights on his lockdown law-breaking and now desperate to save his own skin." Meanwhile, of course, the Prime Minister's skin is in the hands of his own Conservative backbenchers, and the Prime Minister has suffered the first resignation of a frontbencher since the publication of the Sue Gray report, her damning report into Partygate earlier this week. We hear today of the departure of Paul Holmes as a ministerial aide to the Home Secretary. In a statement to his Eastleigh constituents, Mr Holmes said that his work as an MP has been tarnished by the toxic culture that seems to have permeated Number 10. He goes on to say in the letter, "Over the last few weeks, this distress has led me to conclude that I want to continue to focus solely on my efforts on being your Member of Parliament and the campaigns which are important to you," he said. He did not say whether he wanted Prime Minister Johnson to resign or if he had submitted a no-confidence letter, 54 of which are needed to trigger a vote on the Prime Minister's premiership. Eastleigh constituency on the south coast of England was held by the Liberal Democrats until 2015. It's typical of the seats that some Conservative MPs fear that even with a substantial majority of 15,000 like Holmes could flip given voters' concerns about Johnson. Despite the Prime Minister's allies trying to draw a line under the Partygate scandal, which has dominated the news agenda for 6 months, a series of Tory backbenchers have continued to call for his resignation. Stephen Hammond, the former Health Minister, who has a majority of only 628 in his Wimbledon seat, described the conclusions of the Sue Gray report as damning. He went on to say, "I cannot and will not defend the indefensible." He said, "I am struck by the number of my colleagues who were really concerned that it's almost impossible for the Prime Minister to say, 'I want to move on,' as we cannot move on without regaining public trust. And I am not sure that's possible in the current situation." Two other Tory MPs, David Simmons and John Barnes, said they had lost confidence in Prime Minister Johnson, and a fourth, Angela Richardson, who quit as a parliamentary private secretary earlier in the year, said she would have resigned if she had been in Johnson's position. Julian Sturdy, the Conservative MP for York Outer, called on Wednesday for Johnson to go. The report has left him unable to give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt, he said. Prime Minister Johnson's own anti-corruption czar, John Penrose, who revealed this week that he was still thinking about whether to submit a no-confidence letter, said, there's a great deal of concern about whether or not he's telling the truth in Parliament. Okay, on to Scottish news now. Following the local elections in Scotland last May, parties have been trying to work out who is to lead various councils, and cracks are starting to appear in Labour over their deals with the Tories in council chambers across Scotland. A number of key figures have spoken out against alleged stitch-ups which have seen Labour offer the Tories positions of power in administrations or abstaining to allow the Tory party to take control of councils. Member of the Scottish Parliament Mercedes Villa-Alba for Labour tweeted that no Labour representative worth the name would ever put the Tories in power, while former MSP Neil Findlay said he was appalled by West Lothian Labour councillors and their shameful decision to vote the Tories into power there. In Edinburgh, former Labour MP Mark Lazarevich described the Tory-Labour deal in that city as unacceptable, and 2 Labour councillors in the city refused to back the plans when it was put to a vote. Commenting, the SNP's member of the Scottish Parliament, Siobhan Brown, said, "Even Labour Party members cannot stomach the grubby backroom deals their party has done with the Tories across Scotland. They can see these stitch-ups for what they really are as Labour ditch any principle it had left and open the door to let the Tories into power." She said there will be Labour campaigners across the country disgusted after they knocked on doors for their party and did not ever imagine that the councillors they helped elect would be working hand in hand with the Tories as soon as the election results came in. The cracks are beginning to show, as not only has Anna Sarwar's promise of no deals with the Tories been completely shattered, but they have let in the very architects of the cost of living crisis into power, a devastating move for communities across Scotland. Anna Sarwar has lost all credibility on a cost of living crisis as his party has allowed the Tories into power in a quarter of councils across Scotland. He is also starting to lose credibility and authority with his own party as a result. She said it's only the SNP that can be trusted to stand up to the Tories and keep them out of power while Labour roll over and let them in at the first opportunity. Now a Westminster story about the DWP, the Department of Work and Pensions. New figures show that the DWP underpaid people on benefit by £2.6 billion in the year 21-22 following the pandemic and amidst the cost of living crisis. The department also overpaid £8.6 billion, that's 4% of the total benefit expenditure, as a result either of their own errors or of fraud. This data comes as the Chancellor yesterday set out an economic plan which he said aims to target the poorest in the UK. The SNP have sharply criticised Rishi Sunak, calling his words hollow in the face of the DWP's failure to get the financial report to those who need it most. Commenting, Work and Pensions spokesperson at Westminster for the SNP, that's Kirsty Blackman, MP, said, "The Tory government's talk of targeting financial support to those who need it most rings hollow when we see that those very same people have missed out on almost £3 billion immediately after the pandemic and amidst a cost of living crisis. The Department for Work and Pensions needs to get its act together. We cannot afford errors or mistakes that lead to millions missing out on vital cash at a time when people are struggling to afford the very basics. It could have made all the difference to someone who is having to choose between eating and heating their home. It could have allowed them to do both or given their family an extra meal." She said the UK government must take urgent action to ensure that those who have been underpaid get the money they are entitled to as soon as possible, and those who have been overpaid should not be forced to pay it back. Let's look at the shooting again. We reported a couple of days ago the dreadful shooting in Texas of those 19 school children and 2 teachers in Uvalde, Texas. The gunman in the Uvalde school massacre, Texas, barged unchallenged through an unlocked door before he killed those 19 children and the 2 teachers while holed up in their classroom for an hour before a tactical team stormed in and killed them, the police said on Thursday, that was yesterday. The latest official details from the Texas Department of Public Safety on Tuesday's mass shooting differed sharply from the initial police accounts and raised questions about security measures at the elementary school and the response of law enforcement. The school district of Uvalde, Texas, which is 80 miles west of San Antonio, has a standing policy of locking all entrances, including classroom doors, as a safety precaution. But one student reported that some doors were left unlocked the day of the shooting to allow visiting parents to come and go for an awards day event. The newly detailed chronology came hours after videos emerged showing desperate parents outside the Robb Elementary School during the attack. They pleaded with officers to storm the building, and some fathers had to be restrained. The human toll of the rampage, which ranks as the deadliest US school shooting in nearly a decade, deepened with the news that the husband of one of the slain teachers died of a heart attack yesterday while preparing for his wife's funeral. At a briefing for reporters, DWS spokesperson Victor Escalon said that the gunman, one Salvador Ramos, aged 18, made his way unimpeded onto the school grounds after crashing his pickup truck nearby. The carnage began 12 minutes later. Preliminary police reports had said that Ramos, who drove to the school from his home after shooting and wounding his grandmother there, was confronted by a school-based police officer as he ran towards the school. Instead, no armed officer was present when Ramos arrived at the school. Escalon said the suspect crashed his pickup truck nearby at 11:28 a.m., which is 16:28 GMT, then opened fire on two people at the funeral home across the street, then scaled the fence onto school property and walked onto one of the buildings through an unlocked rear door. This brings us to 11:40 a.m., Escalon said. Two responding officers entered the school 4 minutes later, but took cover after Ramos fired multiple rounds at them. According to Escalon, the shooter then barricaded himself inside a fourth grade classroom of his victims, who were mostly 9 and 10-year-olds. He was there for an hour before the US Border Patrol tactical team finally breached the room and fatally shot him. According to Escalon, officers reported hearing at least 25 gunshots coming from inside the classroom early in the siege, he said. The hour-long interval before the border arrangement agent storm didn't appear to be at odds with the approach adopted by many law enforcement agencies, which is to confront active shooters at schools immediately to stop further bloodshed. Asked if the police should have made an en masse entry sooner, Escalon answered that's a tough question, adding that authorities would offer more information as the investigation proceeded. He described a chaotic scene after the initial exchange of gunfire, with officers calling for backup and evacuating students and staff. And another international story now. The family of the killed Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh has allowed her death to be added to a legal complaint being taken to the International Criminal Court, arguing that Israeli security forces had been systematically targeting Palestinian journalists in violation of international humanitarian law. The case, originally submitted in April by Bindmans, had focused on 4 Palestinian journalists wearing press helmets and vests, 2 of whom were maimed and 2 shot dead. It also covers alleged attacks on Gaza media infrastructure in May 2021. Lawyers from Bindmans and the Doughty Street Chambers announced the addition of the death on May 11 of Abu Akleh to the existing claim. This was announced at a press conference in London. They said the case was vital owing to the repeated failure of the Israeli security forces to investigate such incidents and the inability of Palestinian reporters to secure reparations in Israeli domestic courts. Jennifer Robinson from Doughty Street said, "The ICC prosecutor must investigate our complaints and prosecute those responsible and send a clear message not just to the Israeli forces and government, but to all governments that target journalists, to remind them this is a crime and that journalists are not fair game." She said the ICC prosecutor needs to open the case because it was emblematic of a problem that had been continuing for many years. The ICC will have to judge whether there's a prima facie case that the Israeli security forces have been deliberately targeting reporters and whether its internal inquiries are consistent with natural justice. There will also be issues of jurisdiction. In February 21, the ICC said its jurisdiction extended to Gaza and the West Bank, making it more likely that the ICC can take up the issue. Israel itself is not a party to the ICC, raising issues of enforcement of any eventual ruling. The case is being supported by representatives from the International Federation of Journalists, the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate, and the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians. Tayyab Ali, the Binman's solicitor in the case, said evidence was not lacking, but the political will was, adding, Israel in the past has been gifted immunity. Abu Akleh was shot dead by Israeli forces while she was covering an Israeli raid in Jenin City. Ali Amsaduri, her local producer, was wounded by a bullet to the back at the scene. Separately on Thursday, the Palestinian Authority announced the results of an investigation into her death, saying it revealed that Israeli forces deliberately shot and killed the reporter. The Palestinian Attorney General, Akram al-Khatib, said Abu Akleh was hit by an armour-piercing bullet, adding that the injury proves that at the scene of the incident, armed Palestinians were not present and the Israeli forces were the only ones present. The bullet that killed Abu Akleh was a 5.56mm round with a steel component used by NATO forces, he said. Al-Khatib added that the shot was fired by a soldier who stood about 170 metres away. He also said that the Palestinian Authority will not hand the bullet over to Israel for examination. Israel's Defence Minister Benny Gantz responded to the Palestinian report, saying that Israel finds the death of Shireen Abu Akleh regrettable, and the IDF, the Israeli Defence Force, is carrying out an examination in order to arrive at a truthful examination. Right, excuse me. Well, it's a holiday weekend. We don't have very many news stories in tonight. So that's about it for now. So we will be back, of course, on Sunday with the Full Scottish Sunday lunchtime. That show goes out at 12 o'clock. Now, our team will be going to Aberdeen tomorrow, and my colleague Andrew Wilson will be reporting from there on Sunday. There is an independence event taking place. It's Progress to Yes, hosted by Aberdeen Yes Movement. And so it's the Aberdeen Independence Movement hosting that conference, looking at strategies moving forward. The Scottish Government, of course, is committed to holding an independence referendum essentially by the end of 2023. So our team will be up there and we'll be speaking to people at the Yes Movement in Aberdeen. And the show on Sunday will be coming from there. So don't miss that. That's going out at lunchtime this Sunday with Full Scottish with Andrew Wilson. So thanks for watching tonight. And just before I go to get my tea, can I remind you we're supported entirely by the people who have logged onto our website and who have given us a standing order. So that's our regular monthly income. We also have in the past been kept going by some larger donations from supporters, and we're very grateful for them. We do have to say, though, unfortunately, it's not enough. The bills are going up here, of course. We've got the rent to pay on our impressive studio in Glasgow. It's an excellent facility, but it does need to be funded. We also, of course, have electricity bills to pay, as well as the internet connections, keeping our 5G service going, which allows us to take the programme from Aberdeen or indeed anywhere. So we've got a lot of bills really to keep this programme going, and we'd like to, of course, do more. So if you want to help us then, if you haven't done so already, it really would be great if you'd click on the website there and start a standing order or a direct debit. No matter how small, any pound that comes in helps us to make programmes and pay the bills and keep us going. So it is important, I'm sure you'll agree, to have independent broadcasting in Scotland, but we don't have any other funding sources except for our donations and the people who subscribe regularly once a week. So thanks for doing that. So that's all from me tonight. So it's a Full Scottish on Sunday, and we'll be back next week with Scotland at 7. Thanks for watching tonight. Good night, and I'll see you later.